In a world of hyper-perfect digital images, we're seeing a powerful trend back to the vintage and retro aesthetic. This episode, we're going to explore why photographers and enthusiasts are embracing the imperfect beauty of film, from the unique qualities of analog cameras to the digital filters that mimic their classic look. We'll discuss the nostalgia behind the movement, the key characteristics of vintage photography, and how to achieve this style in your own work, regardless of if you're using film or a digital camera. Welcome back to another Free Will Photos podcast. Today, we're talking about transitioning back to the film look or even using film as your primary photographic medium. Now, why are so many people moving back, paying all this money to buy film and to process it? Why are so many people doing that? That's what we're going to unpack in today's episode. And of course, if you are watching this over on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below and we can start a discussion of why you think people are starting to transition back into the film look or just shooting film altogether. Now, the whole idea here is the digital space, if you will, the digital photography space. It started to get very clinical. The more the lenses get more accurate and sharp, you get this look on your image that you are like, man, something just doesn't look right about photography when I look at the image that was produced with this lens. And it's not that it's not technically correct, because all of our technology today, essentially any camera that was built in the past 10 years at the time of this recording, so 2015 and up till now in 2025, there's no such thing as a bad camera anymore. Like, we are beyond the early days of digital photography where you would get like these 4 megapixel files, probably even smaller than that, and they didn't look very good. And that was the reason that people got really heavy into photoshopping and things of that sort. But now we're starting to see that we're hitting this point of diminishing returns and maybe even crossing into the hyper realistic aspect of photography where things are just too crisp, and we're looking for a way of dialing that back. And that's kind of the crux and where I think people are starting to shift back into the analog look and feel. And I'm not saying that everyone wants to be on film or in the analog space, but we'll definitely talk about that here today. But what we're really going to focus on is the literal use of analog cameras and digital techniques used to achieve the film look. All right. The look that you would get when you shot film was very specific, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit. But the idea of film stock was that you chose a film based off of your own creative vision, and then that's what you were locked into. With the introduction of digital photography, the sky's our limit, kind of. And, that's why I really enjoy digital photography over film photography. So is there a slight bias in this episode? Probably. But I promise it's not me like bashing on anyone who's going to go and pay $15 for a roll of film. And if they're not developing it themselves, then they have to pay someone to develop it. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not one of those people. But I do think that if you have a digital camera, you have the upper edge, even if it's just using your iPhone or your cell phone if you don't have an iPhone. But let's kind of talk about the allure of analog for a second, because I think that's something that is important. Because why is film actually making a comeback? And I think it really ties back to there's a tangible experience when it comes to film in the hands of the creator. Like, every time that I think about someone shooting film, I think about this physical process. Not that you don't have a camera in your hand when you shoot on a digital camera, because the truth is you do. but not in the same way that you do with film, right? Like, think about it. You get the film in a box, you take the film out of the box, and sometimes it's inside of a light sensitive canister because film is sensitive to light. And then you have to like go through this whole process of putting it into the camera. Usually you got to get it in there really quick, and then you got to set the film onto the little hook and then close the back of the camera, and it'll start to pull the film out of the canister, and expose each of the images as you take the picture. That's like a lot of work and care that goes into getting a good film photo. So I completely understand the tangible aspect, right? We're getting it into our hands. And for many creatives, when you get done creating something with your hands, it feels a whole lot different. First thing, you're getting it back in your hands. And I think that that's important. But the rest of the physical process is just as important, right? We already talked about loading the camera. You only get a certain amount of shots. So with your film, I think you would get anywhere between 12 and 24 exposures. I think there may have been some film that had 32, but don't quote me on that. The point is, you don't get 1,000 photos. Like, we go on our photo walks, and you may come back with 150 photos on your SD card, which I think is awesome because that's a testament of the technology that we have today, that you can just put thousands of images on an SD card and bring them back. But with film, you really only had a certain amount of images that you could expose without having to switch to another roll of film. And then that's a whole nother process. So I think people were more intentional, and that is a part of the tangible experience. Knowing that you can only press that button so many times before you have to change your roll of film, and film is expensive. So every time that you opened a roll of film, you had to essentially use that whole roll too, because you didn't want a half roll of film and end up wasting exposures when you send it off to get developed. So, I think that there's a lot that goes into it about the tangible experience with the limited shots. But, some people, I'm not one of those people, by the way. Some people like the idea of the shutter click. It was very different than our digital shutter clicks. I've listened to a few of them over YouTube just to see like what it sounds like, because I've only shot in film using the disposable film cameras, the point and shoot disposable film. So, you get what you get with those. But the thing here, from what I read about this, is some people really do enjoy the sound of the shutter actuating. And I think that there's a joy in it, right? Because I shoot silent from time to time based off of where I am and the event that I'm photographing. And I would prefer to shoot mechanical shutter all the time, but sometimes you can't. And when you get into this whole idea, just like the iPhone, when you take a photo with that, it's a silent shutter. There's no shutter sound. It doesn't have the same feel as when I press the shutter button and I hear that shutter go off. There's something about that particular sound that is exciting. So I can understand why someone may say, you know what, I want to hear the shutter sound of my film camera. All right. I'm not a crazy person about that, but just going from silent shutter mode on my digital camera to the shutter click on my digital camera, or the mechanical shutter, I should say, I really do enjoy that. All right. And then, of course, there's the anticipation of getting the film developed. And sometimes people who are really big into it, they develop their own film. So they get like super geeked out about exposing the film or developing the film and then seeing the work happen. Again, it's that whole idea of creating something tangible with your hands. And this whole experience doesn't deal with a computer to create the work. And I think that that's what's so important. Computers are great. I love computers. I'm a millennial. I grew up when computers were relatively new to schools, but not so new that we were using like crazy old technology. It's old compared to what we have today, but we were able to do a lot of creative things. When I was in high school, we had print shop, and one of the I don't know what version of Photoshop it was, but we had Apple computers and Photoshop, and we were able to create all kinds of designs. And so that's kind of where I fell in love with the idea of creating inside of a computer. But many of the people that were in my class, they were actual artists, like they drew and painted. So when I was the only one who didn't know how to draw or paint, at least not very good, at least. I was the only one who didn't know how to do that. But if they gave me an idea, I was able to create something inside of Photoshop. And that was my way of being a digital artist. So I enjoyed that. And that was kind of how we worked collaboratively in the class to create our assignments that we had to turn in for grades. And I really enjoyed it. But I think my counterparts or my classmates that were drawing all of their things, they appreciated their work a little bit more because it definitely took them more time. I would be done with my contribution to our assignments in maybe 10, 20 minutes, give or take. And it could take them all class or sometimes multiple class periods just to get their portion of the assignment done. But they appreciated it so much. There was so much care. Like I remember I scanned in a portion of the drawing from one of my classmates. It wasn't the greatest scan that I could have made. And she was very, very upset when she seen the graphic scanned in on the computer. And she was like, "Hey, you're missing this part of the image or the character." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's at the bottom. Who cares?" And you would have thought I had just like kicked her dog or something. She was not very happy with that. And I quickly realized like she took the time and effort to draw this aspect of the character that went all the way down to the foot. And she wanted that in the design because she took the time. And that's the same idea here when it comes to our digital photography or our film photography. You took the time to develop the film if you're doing it yourself, or you at least took the time to care for the film, to find a developer and wait for your film to come back developed, and then creating your images, doing the dodging and burning and stuff of that sort. So I think that the tangible aspect is extremely important. But what's also unique about film and why I think people are going back to it is there's these really unique imperfections that we see in film and in analog or old school, if you will, photography. And those imperfections are in the highlights, the qualities of the actual film stock that you're using. But we got grain, right? And in the digital space, there may be digital noise. And we're very familiar with digital noise, especially when you crank up that ISO in low light situations. Maybe you don't have a lens with a fast enough aperture, which brings me to a whole nother aspect of the hardware that you would use to create a photo. And I don't want to get into like the technicalities because I think that that would make this episode extremely long. And the whole idea here is just to kind of talk why people are moving back to film and trying to get that look with a digital image. All right. So let me get back on track. So the idea here of the unique imperfections is the level of grain. Very similar to a high ISO image, but the grain actually gave a quality to most film stock that, one, you couldn't really get rid of it. You may have been able to expose brighter or darker in the developing, but the grain, it was a part of the texture of the actual film. So you weren't able to get rid of it out of the image completely. And that gave a quality that people really appreciated. And it almost just became a part of the image, right? So based off of the film stock that you chose, grain really played a huge part in the final look. But you would also have these problems, light leaks, where light would get into the sensor or into the film, I should say, because it wasn't a sensor, either through the side of where the lens would attach if you had an SLR film camera, or you may have exposed the film to light by accident when loading or unloading the film from the back of the camera, whatever it may have been. So you would get these light leaks, and those, you could also do them intentionally. There's a technique for that. But most of the time, you didn't really want the light leaks. It just became a thing, and you can't go back and recreate some of these moments. So you just had to deal with the image that had this light leak. And even that became a part of the unique imperfection that was a good quality to the image that people started to enjoy. And there was a creative aspect to it, right? And the same thing when I talk about light leaks, film burns and stuff like that. So same idea happens there. And now we add that type of stuff in digitally because we find it to be creatively fun. Now, the next aspect of unique imperfections is a color shift and the tones that you would get. Obviously, there were some films that were more true to color, like accuracy, but a lot of films, they had a color response that was not very true to tones. And based off of what you were photographing, you would choose the film stock appropriately, and you would choose it based off of what type of final image you are going for. And I am speaking of color images here. So if you're using or thinking of black and white film, that's a whole different aspect of the photography film genre. So definitely focusing on color for this episode, but still very valid that black and white film is a thing. Now, when we start looking at the color nuances inside of the film stocks and the color shifts and tones, I'm thinking of like the Kodak Portra type of film, which, by the way, on my Free Will Photos YouTube channel, I actually made a preset, and we'll talk about those a little bit later in this episode. But I made a preset and a video showcasing kind of how I mimicked the Kodak Portra look, just to help jog some ideas for anyone who's interested. If you want to see that, check the link in the description box or the show notes, depending on where you're listening to this podcast at. But then Fujifilm, which was a huge hit, huge part of the film industry, they had some very unique color shifts as well, the blues and the greens inside of their films. I am no genius when it comes to film overall, but I know that Fujifilm, they're using a lot of film stocks in their digital cameras now, and many people love Fujifilm because of that. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about now, is how do you go from using your digital camera, regardless of if you have a Fujifilm, a Canon, a Sony, a Nikon, whatever it may be, how do you go from taking a digital image and transition that into some sort of a retro style image, right? And I think that mimicking the classic is really possible, as I've showcased in my videos on my YouTube channel, Free Will Photos, is you can use software to replicate an analog look. Now, I want to be very clear. You likely will not get the exact same look that you would get in a film look camera inside of software. It just doesn't happen. You're not going to get it probably ever. However, you'll get something that's really close and that is reminiscent of it. And in my opinion, this is just Chris speaking, in my opinion, I think it's better. And I think it's better because you're creating something that's unique to you, but it pays sort of homage to the classic look that you are trying to mimic or replicate. But you're getting something that is your own creation. And that's what I enjoy the most about this. So if you're interested in learning how to do this, you can definitely go over to my YouTube channel. But here's some software that you can use. The first one that I think everyone should consider is the DxO Film Pack. This is dedicated to creating film stock looks. So even if you want to create your own film stock or your own filmic look, I should say, getting this software allows you to experiment with a ton of film stocks, especially if you're like me and you don't know much about film other than the fact that you kind of get an idea of what it should look like. And in all of my research and examples of what people are posting about, the film stock they're using, stuff like that. Well, DxO Film Pack gives you access to a lot of film stocks from multiple manufacturers. And you just take your digital image, you upload it to this software, you apply your image or apply the film stock to the image, and you just go from there. And you could tweak it. You can make it do whatever you want to do, but it's probably the easiest and fastest way to get a filmic look on your image. And it's a great piece of software. I use it a lot. All right. Now, if you want to pick that up, inside the show notes of the description, I do have an affiliate link, and I also have a coupon code that you can use to save some money when you pick that up. It's completely up to you. There's no pressure. I just want to, help out as wherever I can, but be clear that I do earn a commission. Now, the next software that I would recommend and I use as my own personal editing software of choice, which is On1 Photo Raw. I have a coupon code for that as well. All the same things apply. I make a commission if you use it, but there's no pressure. I greatly appreciate everyone who supports me in that way. With that being said, On1 gives you a lot of tools where you have to be a little bit more manual with creating the look, but you have complete flexibility to make the look the way that you want it to be. So that's the beauty of using On1, if that's something that you want. And it's also a more robust photo editor. So if you're looking for something that gives you a lot of the tools that you'll need to create this film look and additional tools that you don't get with DxO Film Pack or some of the other software that's on the market, well, On1 is probably a great resource for you to consider. Now, beyond the software, let's talk about presets. And I know a lot of people who they tell me in my coaching calls and training calls and photo clubs and everything, I don't use presets. And I feel like that's just a missed opportunity. And with filmic looks, I think presets are extremely important and valuable because if you aren't using presets, you're not going to stay consistent. And that's the key to using a preset. It's not to make every single image look the exact same. In many cases, you're probably not going to make the images all look the exact same because assuming you're changing your exposure settings, the light is changing, the subject is moving, so they're interacting with the light differently. Your preset is not going to work the same on every single image. And I know this because if you look at the histogram, if you take 10 images and you look at your histogram, those histograms are all different. What that tells you, or what that should tell you, is when you apply a preset, that histogram is going to change different. Like the information in the image is different. So that means the preset is going to apply to that image differently than it did the previous image. So presets are not the culprit. The culprit is that everyone wants to find the easy fix. Click a button and instantly create something that looks good. I think that that's the cheap version or mindset of photo editing and, post-processing as a whole. It works if you just got to crank out a bunch of images and you're doing this for hire and you just need to, deliver to the client. I always encourage photographers, deliver what you need to the client as fast as you can, because that's just good business, right? Like, just think about it. If you're on the receiving end of that, you want to get your stuff as fast as you can. So you should be a business that's looking to deliver as fast as you can. That works, one-click editing. And I think that's where a lot of people get the idea, like, if you use a preset, then that's what it's for, and it's very cheap. And that's not what I'm actually encouraging here. Instead, what I'm encouraging is that you create a preset that has all of the basic responses that will give you 80% of what you're looking for in this film look. And then you modify that as you need to in order to get the look that you're going for in that particular image. And this is the beauty of why I'm saying we're not shooting the film in the capacity that we can't change the way that it looks. When you add a preset, it just gets you close, and then you can tweak that preset to get something that looks good for that particular image, but still has the same feel and the same foundation of the film stock that you are replicating. And that's the power of using presets when you are uh, taking a digital image and trying to replicate it into a film like image. Now, here's some of the things that you should pay attention to when you are creating your film stock. And if you don't listen to anything else in this entire episode, this is the part. First, create the preset. And I guess the preset should include these things. First one is you need to reduce the sharpness and clarity. I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but our digital cameras are very sharp and clinically correct. The film style cameras were sharp in their own regard. And if you look at any old photo, like go back and look at some of the award-winning images in the 70s, the 80s, heck, even the 90s. They were not the most clinically sharp images. So everyone who is looking at these camera reviews, and they're like, oh, the sharpness is from edge to edge. Sure, if that's what you're going for, then by all means, that's good. But we don't really need that much sharpness in our images. And we're seeing right now, people are removing sharpness, myself included, because the images are just looking too digitally correct. And it's not real to life in the regards of like what we would see walking down the street day to day. Like, am I saying everything should be blurred? Like you can't even make out what's in the image? No, but does it need to be like finely detailed in every image? And I don't think the answer is yes to that. That's just me. But anyway, first thing you want to do in the preset, or at least one of the things to consider wherever you add this into your preset, you definitely want to reduce the sharpness and clarity. You also want to add some artificial grain or noise to the preset. Now, I'll give a caveat here. Depending on what you shoot your image at ISO wise, pay attention to if you even need the grain or the noise, because with digital photography, you will introduce a level of noise, and every camera produces noise differently. So pay attention to that for your camera. You may or may not need to add this if you're shooting above, let's say 800 ISO is where your camera starts to add in a textural grain that you really like, and you don't want to reduce it using software like No Noise AI or the thing that's built into Lightroom that allows you to remove noise, right? Let's say you like what's in the image. Well, then you don't really need to add grain. So just know that grain may make sense, but it makes sense based off of the ISO of the image that you shot. Then you want to adjust the color balance and the curves to mimic old film. Based off of the film that you're looking for, go to Google, use AI, and ask it questions about the film stock that you're trying to mimic that talk about like, hey, what are the color characteristics? What is the color response that in a bright environment? What's the color response in a dark environment? And then translate that information into your photo editing software of choice and make sure that you get that color balance close to that film stock, and test it out on multiple images just to make sure, because this is going to be the largest aspect that will give you that look that you're going for. All right. And then use vignettes if necessary to draw the eyes of the viewer into your preset. This part, it really goes to the gear that was being used. Some film definitely had the aspect of like burning the edges a little bit and causing a vignette, but most of that was actually caused by the lens or if the film wasn't correctly placed over the lens hole wherever the light was coming in, then you may end up with some vignetting, stuff like that. But digital vignetting, I think many people are familiar with. So add vignettes as you see fit for your own images. You can take that or leave it. That's why I left it at the end. It's really just up to you. If that makes sense. Now that we understand a little bit about creating presets, the importance of them, let's talk about what I think is probably one of the most important aspects of this entire situation, which is you got to shoot your camera like it's film. All right. If you don't capture it well, if you don't use your camera in the right way, and I say the right way, I'm going to explain what I think is the right way here shortly. But if you're not using your camera in a manner that allows you to get these base exposures into your raw images or into your images in general, you're going to have a hard time translating that in post-production. The whole idea is that if you know you want to turn these images into a filmic-like look, you have to shoot your camera like it's film. Don't make it an afterthought. Start from the point that you are about to press the shutter button. So then that means you got to look at your camera settings. All right. Now, with that being said, most rolls of film come in 18 to 24 shots, sometimes 32, sometimes 28, whatever. The point here is take your time, right? You don't need to be the fastest. Of like just out there spraying and praying, even though you have a digital camera. Obviously, if there's a moment that's fleeting and you just want to capture the moment, then do it. Like, don't like hold yourself too harsh to the 18 to 24 exposures. But if you want to shoot like it's film, have that mindset that you need to take your time, be intentional, because the truth is the photos that made the most impact with film was not because they were just pressing down the shutter button and hoping that somewhere in that barrage of photos, they're going to have something that's going to be good and award winning. It was because they took the time and they pressed the button at the right time, or at the time of the most interesting aspect or the most interesting light, whatever it may be, they were intentional. So just keep that in mind. Shoot like that. Now, when we get down to like actual practical settings, right, we want to expose for the highlights. Film, and even in digital photography, you don't have as much latitude to bring back some of those highlight information pieces that go missing. So what you want to do is make sure that you're exposing your film or exposing your image to capture the highlights well and not overexpose so you're losing that information. Now, in digital cameras, many of them, they have multiple metering modes. And in the later Sony cameras, which is the camera manufacturer that I use primarily, they have the highlight metering mode. And I enjoy this metering mode whenever I'm trying to use the film look on my cameras, because what it allows me to do is really pay attention to the highlights in my image, and everything else is going to be darker. And that's fine. I'll fix that a little bit in post, but I do expose for the highlights because I want to make sure I'm not blowing those out. Now, I'm not saying I do this all the time. You have to decide when it makes the most sense for you, but you should definitely pay attention to your highlights, because film usually was leaning towards exposing brighter than it was darker. All right. And with digital photography, I think we want to do the opposite of what the film was doing, because we have a lot of latitude in post. So if you need to bring up the base exposure overall, you can use an exposure slider inside of your photo editing software. So expose for the highlights. That way you have the most detail recovered. And this is like one of the benefits of using a digital camera versus a film camera, because our predecessors didn't have this level of flexibility available to them as we do inside of our digital photography software. The next one is setting your white balance and get it off of auto white balance. Now, this I think is actually crucial. And I am going to recommend later, just jumping forward a little bit, you want to shoot RAW plus JPEG. But the reason why I want to use a specific white balance is because that's the way that you're going to start to see in the film stock that you're trying to mimic. All right. So if you change your white balance anywhere between 3200 Kelvin to 5500 Kelvin, you're going to be in the range of most of the classic film stocks. Now, what you should do is Google what the white balance response is equivalent to in Kelvin for the film stock that you're interested in. I think that that's going to be a huge, huge benefit for you. You should definitely do that. All right. But based on the type of film you want to replicate, you should absolutely match your white balance as close as you can get it out of camera. Trying to do it in post-production is not always the best way forward. Sometimes it's the best, especially with these digital cameras, the mirrorless cameras, where you can see your exposure on screen. You want to be able to visualize, or at least I like to visualize what I'm doing. So having it up on the screen for me is extremely helpful. I recommend that you do the same, but you do you. Feel free to move your white balance around, obviously, in the event that the white balance for the film stock, let's say it's a 5000 white balance, or at least that's what your research tells you. But the thing that you're photographing, it just doesn't look right. Well, change it. All right. Just change it. Don't worry so much about being a purist when it comes to this, because the fact is we're not. It's still digital programs, and we should use our digital assets to their ability, which means that we can change the white balance, unlike our predecessors who didn't have the ability to change their white balance. Heck, they couldn't even see what their image was going to look like unless they shot it as a Polaroid. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now, I've mentioned it earlier, and I don't know why I put this in my notes towards the bottom, but whatever. You want to shoot RAW plus JPEG. I'm going to recommend that you edit your RAW file, but the reason you have the JPEG is because it's going to give you the closest resemblance to what you were seeing on the back of your camera when you reviewed the image. All right. And the reason that it does that is because even if you shoot RAW only, there's like this really small JPEG representation that the camera is actually showing you. It's hard to recover that RAW, that JPEG file as accurate on the back of the camera than if you just shot a JPEG image, right? You can shoot whatever size JPEG you want. I personally shoot the largest JPEG file that I can, because in many cases, I could use that JPEG file right out of camera and tweak it just a little bit with a preset, and I'm going to have something that looks like the film stock that I'm mimicking. I don't always do that, but that is an option that's available. But if you're using On1 for the RAW, then of course you can use the match AI tool, which allows you to match the JPEG image to the RAW file. And if you're using other software like Capture One, or I don't know if Photoshop has this, but I know that Luminar Neo does, you can match a look. And On1 also has match color. So essentially you can take your JPEG image that was shot right out of camera, and you can match the settings or the look of that image to your RAW file, and it's going to get you a lot closer to what that JPEG looked like in your camera. So shoot RAW plus JPEG. It's going to save you a whole lot of extra editing time. Like I can't stress that enough. You want to shoot RAW plus JPEG just to give you that flexibility. All right. And that's kind of the main reason why you would want to shoot RAW plus JPEG. And then the last note that I have here is take your time when shooting, but I already talked about that earlier, the whole point here is you want to photograph something that's interesting. Take your time and be a photographer, not, a person that just presses a button, because anyone can press a button, but only photographers can actually see what's happening. And then you enhance what you saw in post-production by adding in this filmic look. And that's what the true art form of photography, when it starts to form. All right. And what I personally enjoy, and I hope many of you who are listening to this also enjoy. So, wrapping everything up, we talked about the tangible aspect, physically shooting in camera or with a film camera, which if that's what you want to go do, then by all means, go for it. Let's do it. But I think where you will get the most benefit is using a digital camera and then bringing it into a software editor of choice. I did offer on one. Again, those affiliate links are down in the description box or show notes. So if you want to save some money, you can use those either on One Photo Raw or DxO Film Pack. Those ones will work. I'll also leave a link to Luminar Neo, which is another software that works wonderful for this type of thing. And every program works differently, but they all work really, really well. And then the final thought that I'll give you is take some time to look at old film images, especially if that's something that if you want to go into this filmic look on your digital images, definitely take some time to look at old film images in the film stock that you are the most interested in. There are, at least I know that there's a Kodak Portra Instagram account, so I imagine there's many Instagram accounts out there. If I find any, I'll leave those linked up in the show notes as well. So tons of links for you in the show notes today, but nonetheless, take some time to research the film stock that you want to create, and then go and make your own look. Use that as a inspiration, but make your own in-state look, because I think that's where you're going to get the most out of this particular revival, if you will, of the filmic look. And when people see your images versus your, not a competitor, but someone else's images, another artist, we'll say it like that, yours are going to hold a little bit more merit and interest. They're going to be more creative and different because it's something that you uniquely created. So hopefully that resonates with someone. If it does, then by all means, interact with this podcast. However, your listening platform allows you to do so. If you want to get in contact with me, my email address is the best way to do that. You can also come over to freewillphotos.com and sign up for a free account there and send me a message through that. So with all that out of the way, I hope you guys stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.